As I said earlier, the BDS movement is a rights-based approach in that it does not take a position on the one state versus two states solution of this colonial conflict. Now, this doesn't mean that each one of us doesn't have a position. Each one of us does have a position. I personally, with my other hat, have advocated one state for 27 years. Consistently, I've been against the two-state solution. And I only see a one democratic state as the most moral solution to this conflict. Now, but let's go back to the question about BDS. Does BDS tacitly lead necessarily the one-state solution? I think the question is irrelevant to whether we should support it or not. Why? I will answer the question, but I have to say that it's irrelevant whether we should support it or not. If somebody is committing a crime and I should take part in stopping this crime, at the very least, I should not participate in the crime. That's a moral obligation, regardless what might come out of this ending the crime. If I'm a partner in crime, stopping this partnership in crime is no heroism. It's basic moral obligation. When we call on the West to end its complicity in Israel's occupation and apartheid, we're calling for basic human decency, nothing heroic. End your complicity. Don't support their crimes. The next step is help us end the crimes. That's a bit more heroic. But regardless, that's a moral issue that has nothing to do with what the outcome might be. Especially that, how scary is this outcome? When we say that, well, yeah, I have it. About the delegitimization, the worst case scenario, one think tank, Rabble.ca Institute, that has been publishing most of the arguments against the BDS campaign, had this same question. I'll just quote it from them, just to bring this, to connect it to what you asked me. What made this delegitimization scare tactic fail even more in the mainstream liberal West was that the nightmare scenario was that the movement's aim would, quote, supersede the Zionist model with a state that is based on the one person, one vote principle. This is the nightmare scenario. Hardly something that would, hurt the ears of any liberal. So, if this were the case, as I said, BDS does not have any intention as a movement leading towards a one-state solution. It's a mainstream consensus movement. We have Fatah, we have center, we have left, we have... The majority of the groups within the BDS movement do not endorse one state. Maybe the majority of the more active ones of us do, but the majority of the groups do not. So we do not take a position. But let's assume it were to lead to a one-state solution. What is wrong with a one-person, one-vote solution, ultimately? If it's good in any democratic country, why is it so bad and genocidal and disastrous in Israel? Why should we, the indigenous people of the land, accept settler colonialists as our masters forever, as fate? So from a one-state perspective, my other hat, not as a BDS spokesperson, ultimately, as the indigenous population, the most generous offer we can give to our colonial settlers is equality, but nothing more. Don't ask for colonial privileges, you'll not get it. So we don't need to be tacit. I mean, if the BDS movement were intended towards a one-state solution, we could have said it. But it's really not. The majority are not for a one-state solution in that movement. About the other question was about cutting off communication with Israel. I think the premise is faulty. The premise is, we're talking about academic and cultural boycott specifically, because economic, there is no communication. So no one objects about that. It's the academic and cultural that raises most controversies. That, we do not want to cut off relations from our Israeli academic and cultural figures, colleagues, partners, research partners, and so on. But who's calling for cutting off links? PACBI, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, in its boycott call of 2004, until now, has never, ever called for severing links with academics or with individuals. Unlike the South African boycott, which was a blanket boycott, by the way, and again, I said people do have short memory. The South African boycott was blanket against everyone and everything South African. It did not raise much problem in the 1980s. People were fine with that. But the Palestinian boycott, academic cultural boycott, never calls for severing links with individuals. It's an institutional boycott against Israeli institutions due to their complicity. Nothing prevents an Israeli academic from coming to a University of Toronto conference to speak, to present, to do joint research, to do anything of that sort, so long as it's not an institutional link. An institutional exchange program between U of T and Ben Gurion University is complicity and should be boycotted. That is our target, not the individuals. Now, why aren't we targeting individuals in Israeli academia and cultural establishment? Is it because of the liberal Zionist myth that they are at the forefront of the struggle against occupation? Absolutely not. They're as racist, as bigoted, as colonial as the average Israeli. Not any better. I'll give one example. In 2008, 4 Jewish Israeli professors started a petition calling upon the Israeli authorities to allow passage at checkpoints to professors, Palestinian professors, and students to reach their universities. They did not even call it the occupied territories, lest they would offend somebody's sensibilities. So they call it the territories. We call on the Israeli authorities in the territories to allow passage at checkpoints to Palestinian professors and students to get to their universities. The most basic academic freedom demand. They passed it on to all 9,000 Israeli academics, thinking that any self-respecting academic would at least support that demand. Only 407 out of a population of 9,000 Israeli academics saw it fit to sign this petition. 407, less than 5%. This reflects very well the level of progressiveness among Israeli academics. Professor Yehuda Shenhav, a Jewish Israeli professor, did research a few years back on the total number of Israeli academics who have ever signed anything against the occupation or taken any public stands against the occupation. And he found a few hundred out of what was then about 7,000 academics have ever taken a public position against the occupation, let alone ending apartheid in Israel, let alone the right of return. Just ending the occupation. So the academic community in Israel has not distinguished itself at all from the average Israeli opinion. But we don't call for boycotting individuals because we don't believe in McCarthyist measures. We don't believe in political tests, in blacklists. Who's a good Israeli, who's a bad Israeli? We don't do this on principle. We're boycotting institutions because they're complicit. That is black and white. That is very clear. But even then, there are very nuanced guidelines that PACBI has developed. You can check them on the PACBI website, pacbi.org. Very nuanced on how to boycott and what to boycott. They're nuanced to make sure, as much as possible, that we don't inflict any injury on anyone that does not deserve.